Welcome to the descent. Not the good elevator, not the one in fancy hotels or corporate lobbies, no. This is the one they built under the building. The one nobody admits exists. The one that only goes down. Tonight, as we continue the season of obsession, we're taking it floor by floor through the madness arc. And each stop, a different flavor of awareness collapsing in on itself. You'll hear a ding before every descent. That's not comfort, that's warning on each floor. This is One Up the Annals, where shame becomes legend, and this time, legend lost the map. I'm your host and guide, Rab Greason. The original influencer, and tonight, just a man standing next to an open door, hoping you don't step all the way through. So far this season, we've explored the creative core, the atomic center of obsession. Howard Hughes chasing control until it caged him. Heath Ledger, whose creativity cast a shadow over sleep. Robin Williams, who never stopped moving because the silence would get too loud. Brilliant, burning, barely holding the line of awareness that separates genius from madness. But tonight, we step past the line. This isn't the other side of the same coin, this is the coin melted down and sharpened. These men we're about to meet didn't lose awareness, they rejected it. They chose obsession without reflection, calculation without empathy, soulless destruction. And that changes everything. This episode isn't just about what they did, it's about what they became. And before we go any further, the Madness Arc disclaimer. This episode contains detailed accounts of real crimes, compulsions, and fully certified nightmare fuel. It is graphic, it is uncomfortable, and no, it's not a murder mystery, it's more of a murder audit. So let me be clear. This is not a tribute, not an origin story, not a damn Netflix pitch. It is documentation. And if your idea of a fun time is analyzing serial killers like they're misunderstood startups, maybe log off, champ. You could have lost your awareness. This one's not for you. Everything you're about to hear comes from confirmed records, case files, and court transcripts. No embellishment, no fan fiction, just the truth, blood-stained and alphabetized. And as for me, I claim no side and humbly sit as an electron of some kind of normalcy, orbiting others' genius and madness. I didn't invent these monsters. History did. I just keep their scrolls in the back drawer next to the bleach. So if you're here for catharsis, you're lost. If you're here for closure, there's none. And if you're here thinking this might help you sleep better, you need therapy more than this podcast. Please keep your arms and sanity inside the car at all times, or you may find someone gnawing on them. We are not responsible for what you become on floor one. From genius to madness. Let's bring the dark into the light. Let's go! Season of Obsession Madness Arc. There's a moment when awareness flickers. And in that breath, genius dies. And madness doesn't just rise, it organizes. This isn't fiction, it's not a fever dream, it's a formula. Because when you split the atom of obsession, you don't just get brilliance, you get fallout. You get men who don't spiral, they construct. Blueprints of horror, frameworks of rot. Not artists, not inventors. Just a different kind of architect, one who builds without conscience, with obsession as his compass. We have looked at genius, but now we're diving into what happens when awareness is gone, when the center can no longer hold. And the electrons of normalcy, they're still orbiting, powerless, watching. Tonight, it's madness. Because genius and madness aren't opposites, there are protons and neutrons in the same cursed core. What separates them isn't morality, it isn't fame, it's awareness. Awareness is the fragile filament that keeps genius from metastasizing into madness. And when that filament breaks, creation becomes consumption, vision becomes control, and that kind of control becomes cruelty. This is not the story of genius men who lost their way. This is the story of those who never looked for the way out. The ones who let the obsession dig its claws in, not to build, but to dominate. H. Holmes, the man who turned architecture into execution. Ted Bundy, the charm so polished it blinded even its own reflection. Edmund Kemper, the genius with no brakes and no bottom. Jeffrey Dahmer, who didn't want to kill just to keep. Dennis Rader, who filed his murders like invoices. All brilliant, none aware, and that is the difference. Because when you remove awareness from the atom, you don't get silence, you get procedure, you get plans. The performance of genius without the soul. Let the tour begin. H. Holmes, the architect of the collapse. Act 1, the madness. There's a reason we start Madness side of the atom with Herman Webster Mudgett, the man history baptized H. Holmes. Not because he was the first American serial killer, not because he built the infamous murder castle, not because Hollywood can't resist turning him into a boogeyman, but because Holmes is the purest form of what happens when obsession escapes gravity. If Hughes was obsession with control elevated to brilliance, Holmes was obsession with control emptied of awareness, collapsing into predation. Hughes built an empire to protect himself. Holmes built one to consume others. That is the difference. That is the collapse. And it begins quietly. The boy who learned to lie before he learned to speak. Holmes wasn't born brilliant. He was born restless, curious, and terrifyingly void of empathy. He taught himself to charm adults by age 5. He dissected animals in barns before puberty. In school, he could mimic classmates so perfectly teachers couldn't tell who spoke. He wasn't performing like Robin Williams. He wasn't creating like Heath Ledger. He wasn't engineering like Howard Hughes. The curse Holmes saw as a gift was darker. He could sense exactly what people wanted him to be. And he could become it. Effortlessly, instinctively, without conscious. That is not genius, that is awareness stripped of compassion, turned into camouflage. It's the first sign of the atom broken. At the University of Michigan Medical School, Holmes discovered the obsession that would define him. Bodies. Their structure, silence, value. Little known fact, and this matters. Holmes didn't just study anatomy, he stole cadavers. He insured them. He burned them past recognition, and then he collected the payouts. That coldness, that unblinking vacancy, is the absence of the membrane, the loss of awareness, the moment obsession stops orbiting and begins feeding. And Holmes fed endlessly. The murder castle wasn't a maze, it was a blueprint of his mind. Chicago, 1893, the World's Fair. Thousands arriving daily. Noise, lights, crowds, a perfect hunting ground. Holmes bought a lot on 63rd and Wallace, and what he built there is often misunderstood as some horror attraction designed after the fact. But here is the little-known truth. Holmes didn't build a murder castle. Holmes built a factory. He was an industrialist of death. The blueprints weren't chaotic, they were efficient. He designed soundproof rooms, gas lines connected to knobs in his private office, sealed chambers with hidden peepholes, grease chutes to drop bodies directly into the basement, a kiln hot enough to incinerate bone, acid vats, a surgical table, a crematorium, a walk-in vault he used as a torture device. He hired contractors, then fired them mid-job so no one understood the entire layout. He switched builders constantly, not just because he wanted secrecy, but because controlling the confusion was the pleasure. The building wasn't a lair, it was a tangible diagram of his obsession. A place where he orchestrated every inch, a world he built solely to dominate. Holmes wasn't improvising like Robin, he wasn't crafting like Heath, he wasn't designing innovations like Hughes. He was designing the absence of awareness itself. Brilliance without empathy, intelligence without reflection, creation without conscience. This is the madness side of the core. Holmes didn't kill for thrill, he killed for ownership. Most serial killers chase patterns. Holmes chased dominion. He wasn't motivated by rage or lust or compulsion in the traditional sense. He wanted to own people, to architect their disappearance, to write the script of their final minutes. This is the difference between obsession as brilliance and obsession as collapse. Brilliance creates, collapse consumes. Holmes consumed. Not quickly, not impulsively, methodically, precisely, almost academically. He treated human life like a ledger. Profitable loss, disposal as routine, bodies as raw material. That's why he thrived during the World's Fair. People vanished constantly. Holmes simply used the environment like a smokescreen. Again, not genius. Just the cold absence of awareness masquerading as intelligence to destroy, not create. The only mistake he ever made was letting someone else speak. Holmes was caught not because he slipped, but because someone else finally did the math. Detective Frank Gare, one of the most relentless investigators in the era, unraveled Holmes' insurance scams, traced missing children across multiple states and connected the disappearances. Holmes watched the walls close in. And here's the little-known chilling fact. When in prison, Holmes claimed he was growing more and more like the devil every day because he felt nothing. No remorse, no fear, no guilt, no awareness. Nothing. He wasn't losing himself. He never had a self to begin with. He was a hollow nucleus, obsession without awareness, orbiting nothing. When they finally hanged him, Holmes requested his coffin be encased in cement. Not because he feared desecration, but because he feared being forgotten. Even at the end, the control obsession burned. The atom collapses fully. H. Holmes isn't the genius side of the atom. He's what happens when the core implodes, when obsession is pure, awareness is absent, and the capacity for brilliance mutates into architecture built for annihilation. Holmes didn't lose awareness, he never had it. His atom was born split, a reaction with no containment. And in the absence of awareness, all that remains is the event horizon. He was the first proof in the series that without awareness, obsession doesn't create reality. It devours it. Please exit to your left through the corridor lined with teeth. Don't forget to tip your bellhop, he's still looking for his last guest. Floor 2. Bundy's Charm School, now in session. A demented ride into the deadliest dimples in history. Welcome to Charm School Dropout. Here we offer a full curriculum in manipulation, mimicry, and murder, taught by Professor Ted Bundy himself. Valedictorian of the Narcissistic Academy. Major in sociopathy, minor in trust me, I'm handsome. If he offers to carry your groceries, say no. Please keep your morals inside the ride at all times. Ted never used his and may project on you. Ted Bundy, The Performance of Evil, Act 2 of the Madness Core. If H. Holmes was the architect of madness, Ted Bundy was its leading man. Smooth, handsome, well-spoken. He didn't hide in the shadows, he stood in the spotlight. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. Where Holmes built walls, Bundy built mirrors, not to reflect himself, but to refract others. Until even they didn't know what they were looking at. He wasn't the most methodical, but Bundy was the most performative, and it worked. Because his obsession wasn't with violence, it was with audience. Ted Bundy knew exactly what he looked like. Dark curls, wide smile, eyes that switched from soft to shark in one blink. He used charm the way other killers use knives, and often the charm came first. He lured women with fake casts, with crutches, with polite conversation, with intelligence. But here's the chilling part. He didn't do this to gain trust. He did it to watch trust disintegrate by his hand. This wasn't genius. This was manipulation rehearsed like a monologue. A part played so often he forgot it wasn't real. Bundy wasn't pretending to be normal. He believed he was, until he didn't. And then, he just kept playing the role, because the audience never stopped clapping. He studied psychology, worked at a suicide prevention hotline, took political gigs, sat in on rape trials, volunteered with law enforcement, and everyone said the same thing. Ted's such a great guy. But none of that was an accident. It was design. He inserted himself into systems of justice, care, and control. Because they were stages and he was the star. Even when arrested, Bundy didn't crumble. He played every scene. Law student representing himself, jail escape artist, tabloid heartthrob. Final act? Begging for life. He wasn't defending himself, he was directing the play. And the press ate it up. In that courtroom, he didn't feel fear, he felt applause. This is the part where you're supposed to be impressed he got into law school. He also failed out. You know who else got into law school? Literally thousands of people who didn't strangle women in parking lots. This is the part of the ride where obsession with audience becomes madness, not because it deceives others, but because it consumes the self, until only the performance remains. He collected reactions, not trophies. Some killers take souvenirs, some leave messages. Bundy took something more abstract, the echo. He returned to crime scenes, revisited decomposing victims, rearranged them. Not because he was obsessed with the dead, but because he was obsessed with what their deaths meant to him. Each woman was a scene, each body a stage direction. Each response from police, media, or public was a review. Bundy didn't kill for blood, he killed for acknowledgement. Even in the details, the placement of bodies, the careful duplications, the ritualistic acts, there is no true compulsion. There is only choreography. The collapse was televised. When Bundy was finally tried in Florida, he was granted what no other serial killer had been before. A nationally televised trial, and he performed. Grinning, flirting, objecting, charming jurors, waving to cameras. He proposed marriage in court. He argued with judges. He examined witnesses. The courtroom became a talk show and Bundy was the host. Even his last interviews, the so-called confessions, were laced with passive blame, script notes, and camera-ready lines. He warned about pornography. He posed as a tragic, cautionary tale. He made himself into a public service announcement. Still acting, still rewriting the role. Even in death, Bundy wanted applause. He didn't fear the electric chair. He feared obscurity. Ted Bundy wasn't a misunderstood genius. He was the first influencer to use the courtroom as a catwalk. Netflix should owe him royalties for 75% of their true crime catalog. If obsession is the fuel of the atom, Ted Bundy was the flashbulb at the center. A radioactive performance with no core to contain it. He didn't burn hot like genius. He didn't collapse like Holmes. He projected, casted his madness across every screen until he mistook the illusion for intelligence. But it wasn't genius. It was emptiness with good lighting. The awareness was never there, only the spotlight, only the echo, only the applause. We hope you've enjoyed your walk through Ted Bundy's highlight reel. On your way out, stop by our merch kiosk. Grab a commemorative fake cast or a pamphlet on how not to fall for a predator in khakis. Floor 2 complete. If you're still with us, your frontal lobe deserves a hazard pay. Coming up next, the man who kept trophies in his freezer and victims in his mind. This one's colder. Floor 3. Jeffrey Dahmer, the food court. 'Cause he ate people, get it? A love story with no survivors. Please watch your step, the tiles are sticky. You've arrived at Dahmer's Diner, home of the most disturbing takeout in hell. It's BYOB. Bring your own body. If this is your stop, you're probably not coming back. Jeffrey Dahmer, The Preservation of Madness. Act 3 of the Madness Corps. If Bundy was the performer, Jeffrey Dahmer was the archivist of madness. A man trying to catalog a loneliness so vast, he mistook destruction for preservation. Where Bundy fed on attention, Dahmer fed on fear of abandonment so extreme he tried to freeze time itself. Not genius, but a twisted imitation of creation, as if keeping the body meant keeping the connection. His obsession wasn't sexual, not really. Not violent, not at first. His obsession was possession. The terror of being alone so profound that he tried to sculpt permanence out of people who were still breathing. This isn't brilliance corrupted. This is awareness fully absent, a mind rotating around its own void. Born in silence, Dahmer didn't enter chaos with fire, he drifted in quietly. A lonely child, isolated. Mother locked in her room with pills, father burying himself in work. Arguments rattling the walls. Jeffrey learned early that emotions made noise, and noise made everything worse. So he muted himself. He became the observer, the kid who watched from door frames, memorizing expressions he didn't know how to mirror. He didn't imitate people, he studied them. Not like Holmes, who analyzed utility, not like Bundy, who analyzed angles. Dahmer analyzed existence, the shape of it, the fragility of it. The terrifying freedom of other people having lives without me. This is the seed of his madness, not hunger but absence. A hollow man terrified of being left with nothing but the echo of himself. The classic American warning signs, isolated teenager, dead animals, and no one paying attention. We all had hobbies, Jeff just kept his in jars. At 18 he picked up his first victim, a hitchhiker. Not because he wanted to kill, but because he wanted him to stay. Dahmer later said, I didn't want him to leave. I didn't know how to keep him. And that's the split in his atom. Holmes kills for control, Bundy kills for performance, Dahmer kills for preservation. A child's fear in an adult's body trying to freeze the moment before abandonment. He kept the remains not as trophies but as company. He talked to them, lived beside them, organized them. It's a horror story, yes, but underneath it is a sadness so bottomless, it becomes monstrous. This is not intelligence, this is vacancy masquerading as logic. What Dahmer wanted was simple, a partner who'd never leave, a companion who'd stay silent, a love without the burden of participation. Most people buy a goldfish. Jeff made his own roommates and put them in jars to admire them the same way. Dahmer had no grand scheme, no architectural plan like Holmes, no spotlight like Bundy. He had attempts, each one a grotesque experiment to solve a problem he could never name. How do I stop people from leaving? He tried sedation, companionship, necrophilia, chemical lobotomies, drilling into skulls, pouring acid inside to create a living obedience. Not out of cruelty, out of terror. This is the difference that matters. Holmes engineered death, Bundy engineered perception, Dahmer engineered absence of autonomy. Because autonomy meant loss, that he wasn't wanted. He tried to create bodies that stayed warm but would never walk away. It is horror without intelligence, violence without vision, madness that believes it's solving loneliness by erasing the parts of people that make them human. He once drilled a hole in the skull of a 14-year-old boy, poured acid in it, and left him alone in the apartment to grab a beer. The boy escaped, bloody, dazed, naked, and flagged down help. The police arrived. Dahmer calmly told them it was his boyfriend. They believed him and escorted the boy back into the apartment. He was murdered hours later. Imagine smelling death, hearing screaming, and still walking away because the guy says it's just gay stuff. Incompetence this loud should be considered an accomplice. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer lured a 32-year-old man back to his apartment. He quickly sensed something was wrong, the foul odor, the handcuffs, the knife, and managed to escape through the front door, running down the street in cuffs. He flagged down 2 Milwaukee police officers and led them back to Dahmer's apartment. Once inside, they discovered the Polaroids, dozens of photos of dismembered bodies in various stages of decay. When the police finally entered his apartment, it wasn't a crime scene, it was a museum. Every item labeled, organized, cataloged. Skulls arranged like curios, drawers filled with bones. A refrigerator holding what he couldn't let go. Polaroids documenting every moment of disassembly, not out of pride, but as a way to revisit the presence of someone who no longer existed. This is Dahmer's form of madness. A man trying to save moments the human mind was never meant to preserve. His killings didn't escalate like a predator. They deteriorated like a man disintegrating. Each act was a failed attempt to create permanence out of fear. This isn't genius. This is annihilation wearing the mask of intimacy. Dahmer didn't flee, didn't charm, didn't manipulate. He sat with police like a man finally revealed the experiment was over. When asked why he kept everything, he said, "I couldn't bear for them to be gone." When asked why he killed them, he said, "I didn't want them to leave." These aren't rationalizations. They're confessions of attachment disorder turned predatory. No brilliance, no master plan, no awareness, just a broken orbit caught in gravitational collapse. If obsession fuels the atomic core, Dahmer's was the coldest form. A collapsed star clinging to whatever fragments of life it could steal. He didn't burn like genius. He didn't explode like madness. He imploded, dragging others into the vacuum of his loneliness. In the atom of obsession, Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't energy. He was gravity without awareness, a black hole wearing the shape of a man, consuming not out of hunger, but out of fear of the silence when he stopped. And maybe that's the saddest part. His obsession not to be alone wasn't unique to monsters. It was the same obsession that fueled Robin Williams. One made us laugh so we'd stay close. The other took bodies so no one could leave. The difference wasn't need, it was awareness. One lit up 1,000 stages, the other unplugged the world, one victim at a time. One was pure, the other was pure evil. You've survived Dahmer's food court. Please, before we leave, make sure you have all your belongings and appendages. Up next, a man so polite, he labeled his victims like file folders. Floor 4 has entered the chat. Hold the rail, it's time to meet the bureaucrat of blood. Please continue to keep your limbs inside the vehicle and your intellects far away from this one. Floor 4, where brilliance builds a basement and the only thing sharper than the subject's mind, his mother's tongue. And remember, if you hear him explaining himself, it's already too late. Welcome to the Dungeon of Dialogue. This is where the books read you, the brain talks back, and family dinner ends in dismemberment. This is Edmund Kemper III, the co-ed killer, the mama's boy turned monster. The cerebral crypt, where IQ doesn't mean innocent, and the man with the softest voice keeps his mother's head in a box. They called him the co-ed killer, but that title misses the mark. Because Edmund Kemper wasn't just a killer, he was a philosopher of his own pathology. A man with an IQ of 145 and no off switch for the spiral. He didn't hunt for pleasure or power or infamy. He hunted to answer a question no one should have ever had to ask. What's wrong with me? Kemper's madness didn't erupt, it incubated. He was born to a mother who hated men, especially him. Locked in the basement for being dangerous. No sunlight, no affection, only a bed, books, and silence. He didn't play with toys, he decapitated his sister's dolls. Didn't make friends, practiced burial rituals on the family pets. He was building a blueprint, not for murder, but for understanding. He wasn't like the others, he knew it. And when he spoke, he did so with the clarity of a scholar. But that is the trap. He was brilliant enough to analyze his mind, but not strong enough to escape it. At 15, he killed his grandparents, not out of rage, out of curiosity. He said he wanted to know what it felt like, and then, when asked why his grandmother, I just wanted to see what it felt like to kill Grandma, that's all. No flourish, no drama, just the clinical reporting of a boy trying to map the darkness inside him by drawing blood. Fun fact, in most interviews, Ed spoke like a therapist with tenure. Too bad his specialty was behavioral disassembly. After being institutionalized, he charmed the psychologist, outsmarted the system, was released early. A 6'9" tower of intelligence and charm returning home to live with the one person he feared and hated most. His mother. Edmund Kemper, verbally abusive, emotionally brutal. She told him no woman would ever love him. She mocked him for being awkward, for being too quiet, too tall, too soft-spoken. Every night he tried to suppress his anger. Every day it grew teeth. And when he started killing again, he didn't feel thrill, he felt relief. His victims were young women who reminded him of what he was never allowed to have. Normalcy, connection, affection without ridicule. He'd pick them up hitchhiking, talk with them, make them feel safe, and then destroy them because he couldn't bear to see his own reflection in their kindness. He later said, "When I see a pretty girl walking down the street, I think two things. One part wants to take her out, be real nice and sweet. The other part wonders what her head would look like on a stick." That's a quote from a madman. He saved his mother for last. One night after years of humiliation, he stood at her bedroom door. She said, "I suppose you want to sit up all night and talk." He said, "No, good night." And then he beat her with a claw hammer, decapitated her, and performed unspeakable acts on the head of a woman who told him he'd never be loved. He stuffed her larynx down the garbage disposal, but even then it wouldn't stop screaming. Kemper said, "That seemed appropriate, as much as she'd bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years." You've reached the VIP suite. Very imprisonable psychopath. Take a moment to reflect unless you're his mom. She'll be reflecting from inside a decorative box. Coming up, lifetime incarceration and a job reading audiobooks because, of course he did. The philosopher of his own doom. After that, he turned himself in. Walked into a payphone, called the police. They didn't believe him. He insisted. This is what separates Kemper. He wasn't chasing thrill. He wasn't proud. He wasn't pleading insanity. He was the mind that turned on itself. The intellect was so extraordinary. He knew what everyone would think, and portrayed he was self-aware as a manipulation, and it collapsed under the weight of its own reflection. He said point blank, "I was the man who killed his mother and the co-eds because my life had no meaning, and I couldn't let that meaningless spread." He was done. He wasn't aware of anything except how we'd react, and he felt as though he maintained control. The truth was he was done. He wasn't aware of anything except how we'd react, and he felt as though he maintained control by turning himself in. In the atomic core of obsession, Ed Kemper is the unstable isotope, too smart to be dismissed, too broken to be saved. He didn't spiral out, he spiraled in, until the very structure collapsed on itself. His genius wasn't creative, it was corrosive. Awareness used not as a shield, but as a scalpel. And with every cut, he carved himself further from humanity. Ed Kemper is the proof that awareness without empathy isn't protection, it's perdition. Floor 5. Administrative hell. Please watch your step. The carpet is beige, the murder weapon is a clipboard, and the next killer filed a request for his monologue 3 months in advance. That's right, it's time to meet the buying, torture, kill enthusiasts who love procedure more than people. Dennis Rader, the killer who never missed a deadline, except the one with God. He wasn't the strongest, wasn't the smartest, wasn't the most creative, but Dennis Rader was the most dangerous kind of madman, the one who kept records. He lived in Park City, Kansas. A Boy Scout leader, church president, compliance officer. Dennis Rader didn't have a formal police career. He wasn't a police officer. But he did work as a compliance officer, dog catcher, bylaw enforcer for Park City, Kansas, which gave him disturbing authority over residents, and he absolutely acted like a wannabe cop. He also worked in a cubicle at ADT Security, installing alarm systems during his early killing years, and later worked as Christ Lutheran Church as president of the church council and a Cub Scout leader. So while he wasn't law enforcement, he absolutely had a pretend badge complex, a day job with a desk cubicle setup, a disturbing fixation on rules, forms, and authority roles that fed his control fantasy. Somewhere between the citation book and the communion wafer, Dennis forgot which part of his double life was the performance. You ever see someone make strangulation feel like a fire safety seminar? He did. And yes, he really nicknamed his hidey hole the mothership. Floor 5, where sexual obsession issues parking fines and perversion shows up in business casual. He mowed his lawn, waved to neighbors, wrote parking tickets with quiet pride. By all accounts, he was just a guy. And that was the mask. Behind it was the BTK. Bind, torture, kill. 3 steps, 10 victims, 30 years. Madness in a manila folder. Rader wasn't impulsive, he was methodical. He didn't stalk his victims like prey, he filed them. He kept notes, photos, sketches, created manuals, labeled them projects, drew diagrams and code. He even made fake ID badges to enter homes unnoticed. He didn't kill for power or passion, he killed to execute a process. A personal performance review of terror. He was the middle manager of mortar. He was the middle manager of murder, HR for human suffering, and he wanted credit. BTK didn't just commit crimes, he wrote about them. He mailed letters to the police, detailed confessions, poems, puzzles. He wanted to be a brand. He wanted his own horror legacy like Son of Sam or Zodiac. But when no one bit, he went silent for 25 years. In 2004, a local paper ran a story on BTK, the forgotten ghost of Kansas. That's all it took. He couldn't resist. The mask slipped. He started sending letters again, dropped off Barbie dolls arranged like victims, sent word puzzles, mocked police. He even asked if they could trace floppy disks. They said no. They lied. That single disk led to a church computer and the president of the congregation, Dennis Rader. When they caught him, he didn't panic. He was annoyed. Not at the police, but at himself. Because Dennis Rader didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as 2 departments. Dennis, the good husband, the Christian man, the civic helper. BTK, the operator, the performer, the one who put people to sleep. When those departments merged, he folded like a spreadsheet. He gave a full confession, cold, organized, thorough. Not because he was remorseful, but because he couldn't resist explaining the system. In the atomic metaphor of madness, Dennis Rader is the paperwork. Not the explosion, not the meltdown. He is the structure that makes destruction sustainable. He is the man who weaponized boredom, who wrapped atrocity in administrative neatness, who turned serial killing into a protocol. He didn't hunt, he filed, logged, reported, and carried out tasks with the joyless pride of a man balancing a ledger. Rader didn't just cross the line, he made a template for it. And in the core of obsession, Rader wasn't a volatile spark, he was the system update that corrupted the whole machine. His awareness wasn't absent. It was weaponized. No remorse, no spiral, just boxes checked, forms filed, lives erased. Dennis Rader proves that true madness doesn't always scream. Sometimes it documents. Please take a moment to complete the Floor 5 exit survey. Did your terror feel sufficiently premeditated? Were your ropes alphabetized? Would you recommend this psychopath to a friend? Please rate your experience using only office supplies. This is the end of the line. There's no lower floor, just heat and consequence. You don't need a flashlight down here, just a mirror. And a real and comfortable question about what you'd do if no one ever told you no. And there it is. Not genius fallen from grace, but grace never factored in. We watched brilliance cross the line. We watched madness organize itself, but the real horror was how normal they looked when they weren't hunting. They weren't misunderstood, they weren't overstood. They were over-understood. Men who studied humanity like a diagram and found the wires they could cut. Where our earlier episodes traced brilliance orbiting obsession, this one stared straight into the core and watched the shielding melt. Control, creation, motion. Obsessions that kept genius barely aloft. Power, pleasure, dominance, godhood. Obsessions that pulled madness screaming towards the center. The difference? Not intellect, not trauma, not even rage. Just awareness and the terrifying truth. Without it, even brilliance becomes a weapon. Even charm can be a trap. And even monsters wear name tags that say, neighbor. Please exit in a single file line, try not to inhale the fumes, and don't look the obsessions in the eye. They bite. I'm Rav Greason, the original influencer, and tonight your emotional support corpse wrangler, where shame becomes legend and sometimes legend leaves claw marks. I came for the facts, you stayed for the madness, and now it's in the annals. Good night.